Hello, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. So we're listening to a story where a mother is very, very distressed because her little boy has been run over by a hit-and-run driver, and she's going off to Alberta, near to the town of Banff, to, recuperate and to get back hope in her heart, because she's an absolutely devastated mother. And her neighbours have insisted on paying for a flight for her to go to Alberta. They have got a cabin close to Banff where she's going to stay, and so we're going to see where this story goes to from here. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 3 of our story. 2 months earlier, Alicia Bennett's account. I didn't enjoy my trips to Toronto very much. It would take me 36 hours to get there if I went by car, so I always took a flight there and left my car at the airport. While I was in Toronto, my brother gave me full use of his second-hand car, which was awfully useful for me. I did have to make this trip to Toronto, I'm afraid. It couldn't be helped. My father had died a month ago. I had to spend some time in Toronto sorting out his affairs so that me and my brother Rick could put his house on the market as soon as possible. My mother currently lived with me and my husband in our country home in Alberta, as we were so incredibly close. I couldn't envisage her not sharing a house with us. My parents had long since divorced, as my mother and father could not see eye to eye about anything, so the relationship had finally fallen apart, with both of my parents choosing to go their separate ways, which was the best decision they could have ever made, as they really were not suited to each other. I suspected my late father had thought my mother was pretty when he met her all those years ago, because she could clean and cook, and that had ticked all his marriage suitability boxes. But he had failed to realize that relationships are much more about sharing things in common than whether you look pretty on the outside packaging or not, because eventually that is going to come under some wear and tear with the passing of time, so focusing on the outside veneer is not going to guarantee a happy ever after. I guess my father learnt those unfortunate truths the hard way. Growing up, my relationship with my dad had been a little on the taxing side, as I always got the sense my father was a bit of a misogynist, as anything women could do, men could always do infinitely better. I remember he was mortified one day when I suggested I could go fishing with him and my brother, as if my very presence would somehow ruin the whole outing for them, as a female energy might actually scare all the fish away. "Look, love," he had said as politely as he could, "fishing is not a woman's sport. How about you learn to bake something with your mother in the kitchen? I'm sure she can teach you some nice recipes. Maybe when we get back from our fishing expedition, you can surprise us with a nice cake. If you want to know the truth, I'm quite partial to a very good rum barber, but go generously with the rum, that's what I say." I think my father mistakenly believed the best place for a woman was pregnant, barefoot, and in the kitchen, if you get my drift. I think my father's apathetic insouciance towards women may have been one of the very reasons my mother chose to leave him in the first place. I think she had felt invisible in the relationship, almost as if she didn't exist. My father probably treated her more like a glorified cleaner than his own wife. My father and my brother Rick had always got along together famously, like a house on fire. Both of them were passionate about golf, and could be seen out on the golfing green on a Saturday morning together, regular as clockwork, trying their best to get that quintessential hole-in-one. To be fair, my late father and my brother were exceptionally good golf players, I'll give that to them. They would spend the weekends together as if they were the oldest of friends, so they had a fabulous relationship, which I envied greatly. I will admit I did feel left out, as if my dad and brother were part of an exclusive club in which I did not belong and could never gain membership of. I knew that my brother Rick was my dad's favourite, but being female I couldn't hope to compete in the first place. But if I had been a boy, that would have been a different ballgame altogether. I was naturally sad when my father passed away, even though he could be stubbornly opinionated at the very best of times. Despite everything, I had loved him very much. He was my own flesh and blood, after all. Yes, he had stiff, rather rigid, old-fashioned ideas about women's roles in society, and yes, he could be as tough as old boots. But I considered him to still be my beloved father, who was very special to me. Even my mother shed a tear or two after learning the tragic news of his fortuitous demise that none of us ever saw coming. Despite everything, she also had loved him once. "Silly old fool," she said. "Silly, silly old fool. He should have looked after himself better. All that drinking and cigarette smoking, not to mention unhealthy eating practices. Well, I think they finally caught up with him in the end. I told him he needed to take better care of himself. But he told me his declining health was all my fault, because I wasn't cooking him home-cooked meals any longer, after we split up." "I'm sure it's true," I said. "Dad certainly went on the decline after you left him, Mum. I don't know why he didn't get a domesticated worker to cook him healthy meals, or at the very least attend a cookery course to learn how to cook for himself, so he didn't have to rely on such a lousy diet. He might still be around if that were the case." "I told you," repeated my mother, shaking her head furiously. "Your father was a silly old fool. He should have at least got remarried after I left him. But no, he thought he could look after himself. And unfortunately, that's where he fell apart. He had no clue how to look after himself." Me and my brother Rick agreed to clean out my dad's house. This was the original family home where I'd grown up as a little girl. It embodied beloved, wistful, nostalgic memories of my early years spent in this green leafy neighbourhood that was as prepossessing as ever. We had agreed to put the house on the market. It was in reasonably good shape and would fetch a sizable amount of money for us, but it had, of course, accumulated a lot of stuff over the years that needed to be thrown out, like old Christmas decorations, boxes of redundant things that were no longer usable in this day and age, stuff like that. I was staying at my brother Rick's house in Toronto with his wife Sue and their adorable 2 children, Eddie and Tessa. It was decided that both Rick and I would work together on this industrious project, which we hoped would be completed within 3 days. The very slick estate agents we were dealing with were zealously eager to put the house on the market as soon as possible, to stage it to the public, but that could not be done until my father's clutter was ruthlessly dealt with. I'm glad to say my dad wasn't exactly a hoarder, but he did have things that needed tossing out, and a whole lot of paperwork that necessitated sifting through very carefully in case there were any important documents we were obliged to salvage. My brother Rick had faithfully promised to help me with cleaning out my father's house. We knew this was going to be a tediously dull, very monotonous job that would not be for the faint of heart, as sorting out somebody else's mess never is. Of course, there would be stuff that we would be sifting through that stretched back to our childhood years, from kiddies' books to toys, but that went with the territory of a thorough clean-out, as when it comes to a major move, any potential buyers of the property would want to be creating their own memories, and certainly not inheriting ours. I had been in Toronto for 3 days, and had laboriously, painstakingly progressed rather successfully in sorting through my dad's stuff. But Rick failed to arrive on the scene to help me out, as he had promised to do so. I was getting increasingly annoyed and frustrated by his insouciant procrastination. This was so typical of his character. Why was I not remotely surprised by this? Even as a kid, he had artfully wormed his way out of doing almost everything that required hard work and laborious effort. He would mysteriously vanish into thin air when anything unpleasant needed to be undertaken, like cleaning out his bedroom or helping to sift out the junk from the garage. On this occasion, Rick had barely lifted a finger to help me. He was being a little evasive, rather like my late father, expecting the woman to do all the dirty work on his behalf, and disappearing at the earliest convenience. He kept making up a plethora of ambiguous excuses as to why he couldn't be on hand to help me, from having a banging headache to a dreadful stomach cramp that came on him ever so suddenly after eating a burger on the run. "Sis, I'm sorry I can't come around to help you now. I've got the most dreadful stomach cramps. Goodness gracious me, they're unbearable. I ate something very dodgy in that burger. I think there may have been jalapeno." peppers in it, and that does my stomach no good at all. I feel quite ill. I need to let the stomach settle for a while, but I'll be with you shortly, I can promise you that." Then there was something urgent that suddenly popped up, like a cuckoo from a clock, that demanded his immediate attention. "Sis, I'm sorry. I know I promised to help you, but you see, something's come up again. I promised an old friend of mine I'd meet up with him. He's going through a very tough time. I really need to help him." The excuses were endless and seemed to rain down from heaven like the first flurry of winter snow, so that my brother's artful avoidance tactics meant I was doing all the hard graft myself on this clean-up project, so I was feeling very aggrieved and hard done by. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, on my third and final day of my stay in Toronto, when my brother Rick finally rocked up at my father's house. At least he had the good grace to look rather bashful and sheepish about his zero contribution in helping me out over the last 3 days, where we could have made incredible progress with all hands on deck. For indeed, had my brother had the good grace to actually be around, the disagreeable job would be long since over and done with, and my late father's house would be ready to be staged by the estate agents. I regret to say I was not remotely amused by his apathy. I'd been working doggedly hard for the last 3 days, without even stopping to draw breath. I was exceedingly peeved that all my brother's vague, rather obsolete promises to help had been as flimsy as a cling film covering over a bowl of leftovers. I was exhausted by this point, with all the organising and sorting out that I had done. I had become grumpy, and was not nurturing a good mood by any manner of means, nor was I kindly disposed towards my brother. I hasten to say I did not hold back on my festering indignation. I could feel the bubbles of anger rising up inside me, like the effervescence in a fizzy drink. I was covered in dust from head to toe, having climbed up in the attic to remove all manner of stuff that needed sorting out. I had smeared dirt all over my face, and the remnants of spider webs and dust were clinging to my clothes. I was sure I was a sight for sorry eyes. I felt it too. I could have done with a lovely hot bath. I was grubby and filthy dirty, but equally as determined to soldier along and get as much stuff done as I possibly could before catching my flight to Calgary. "What time do you think this is, Rick?" I snapped at him, in a curt, accusatory tone of voice, pointing to my watch. "It's 3 o'clock! Need I remind you that you agreed to be here by 8 this morning?" "Let me guess," I said sarcastically. "You had to take a trip to the moon to discuss the next NASA launch site. Is that it? Or you had to fly away to a magical faraway land on a flying carpet at a moment's notice. Is that it?" "There's no need to be so sarcastic, sis. We've got all the time in the world to fix up Dad's house, have we not? Why all this tearing rush to get everything done so quickly?" I put my hands on my hips and glared furiously at my brother. "Are you forgetting something here? I came up all the way from Alberta to sort this stuff out. It was supposed to take 3 days. This is my final day here, and you've done bugger all to help me. A couch potato sitting on a couch in front of the television, eating a TV dinner, probably would have done more than you have. Need I remind you that you've been gone for 7 hours, and I could have seriously done with your help? Some of those boxes are heavy to lift, and I've been battling to carry them out to the skip that we hired. I'm covered in dust from top to toe. The attic was filthy, but there were lots of things that needed throwing out, and someone had to do it, didn't they?" "I'm very sorry, sis, but I told you I got waylaid. I can hardly help that, can I? You know how it is. That very good friend of mine, he's going through some emotional upheaval, some turmoil in his life. His wife walked out on him, so he's getting a divorce. I couldn't abandon him, could I? He needs my support at this difficult, tumultuous time for him." I scowled at my brother, glaring at him furiously. "Does this friend of yours actually exist, or are you making him up so that you can do the bare minimum to help me? Is that your plan? So you can get me to do all the donkey work around here, while you just sit back at home, or sit there on the golfing green, twiddling your fingers? Is that it?" "Of course I'm not making my friend up. I told you, he's in a very bad place. Didn't I say his wife walked out on him? He needs my support. How would you like it if your husband did the same to you? Why do you keep nagging me like this, sis? You're so unreasonable. Why? Why do I keep nagging you? I said, pointing a finger at my brother. You really want the answer to that? I can't believe you have the gall to ask me that. I don't enjoy nagging you, but someone has to tell you how it is. You're damn lazy, that's why. It's like you want me to do everything, while you do nothing. That's what's really going on here. I'm not stupid, you know. I can read through the lines. Well, between the lines, that is. That's not fair, sis. I cannot help it, can I, if I've been very busy? Yesterday I ate that dreadful burger with the jalapeno peppers, and that was very bad on my stomach. I was very sick, cramping all day I was. I think it was contaminated. My stomach is still in a bad way, I'll have you know. One thing is for sure, I'm never going to go to that burger place again. They put too much chili in the burger. It's far too spicy. Well, isn't it interesting you should say all that? When I asked Sue, your wife, about your apparent stomach cramps, she told me that you hadn't mentioned them to her. The so-called spicy burger that you've eaten. She knew nothing about this mysterious bout of food poisoning you claim to have acquired. She told me you had gone to play golf with a friend of yours, which I don't think you could have done with a dodgy stomach, do you? I didn't tell you about the burger because you know what my wife Sue is like. She hates it when I eat any fast food. She's very particular about our diet. But I really did have a bad stomach, sis. It was cramping up. You should have seen me. I was in a right old state, said my brother, clutching his stomach in exaggeration, as if the cramping had suddenly resurfaced. Come to think of it, I don't feel desperately well right now, he said with a pained expression on his face, as if expecting me to suddenly feel desperately sorry for him. I've got some pain going on in my stomach still, a few more cramps. I think I feel another one of those twitches coming on. Your stomach was so bad yesterday, was it, Rick, that you promptly decided to go and play golf with a friend? You've taken 3 days off work to help me, in case you've forgotten. You were not meant to go swanning off to the golfing green to play golf. My heart bleeds for you when you were hitting all those hole-in-ones with a stomach that was actually killing you. I wonder how you managed to actually do that. Please don't pick on me, sis. I can also feel my headache coming on. All that nagging brings on a migraine for me. Please, will you stop the nagging? Is that what you conveniently tell Sue when she needs your help in something? Your wife was telling me that she asked you to fix her broken kitchen cabinet 6 months ago. You still haven't attended to the matter. Fat lot of use you are, I said, shaking my head furiously. Look, Rick, this job needs to be done, whether you like it or not. And the fresh air is not going to do it for us. I need your help, or otherwise Dad's house is not going to sell itself, is it? You can make up all the fairy tale excuses you like in the world, Rick, until they're coming out of your ears. But by the end of the day, I'm leaving, whether you like it or not. I'm going to the airport. I will leave all the rest of the clean-up to you. It's only fair you do your share of the work. You so far have failed to lift a finger to help me. I'm exhausted and worn out, and frankly, I've had enough. But you can't do that, sis, said my brother, with panic beginning to register on his face, as if he was a dog that had been abandoned by his owner and tossed out of the car to fend for himself. You can't leave the rest of this job to me. That's not fair. You can't leave for Calgary today. There's still too much to be done around here. I think you'll find I can, Rick. Your second-hand SUV I borrowed is now packed with my suitcase, so I'm finished here. You can pick it up from the airport later. I have a flight to catch shortly. I told you that this morning at breakfast when I said my goodbyes to Sue and the kids. Or have you suitably forgotten about that? You knew very well I was leaving today, so don't pretend to be surprised all of a sudden. We could have both accomplished a great deal together if you'd stayed around to actually help me. I was only staying with you for 3 days. I've got to get back home now, Rick. I have a life to live, things to do. I can spare another hour, but that's it. So are you going to help me with the rest of this stuff or not? My brother's face looked reasonably apologetic. I just popped around to tell you that I'm meeting up with that friend right now, the one that's getting divorced. He's still in a very bad way, so I need to be there for him. So I can't help you right now, I'm afraid." "He's in a bad place, is he?" I snorted. "That's rich. Well, I'll let you know something, Rick. He's not alone. A lot of people out there are in a bad place right now. And I'm also in a bad place, stuck here with you and your pitiful, pathetic excuses. Just so you know, I'm leaving right now. I'm not going to stand around to listen to you anymore. I've had enough. I'm going back to Alberta. You can sort the rest of this mess out yourself, all on your own. It should have been finished by now, if you hadn't messed me around in the way you did. I've done my share. And for your information, I don't believe any of the excuses you've been doling out towards me. Don't forget to pick up your SUV from the airport later on. I'm going now," I said, dropping the front door keys into Rick's hands. "But you can't leave," said my brother, staring at me in bemusement, as I marched furiously to his second-hand car, not even bothering to turn around to acknowledge him. I was absolutely livid, very enraged. Any opportunity my brother got to postpone doing something, he would embrace, so he could avoid helping me. It was the story of his life. I know it wasn't a pleasant job, but we both agreed to get our hands dirty together and buckle down and do it. But no, my brother liked to avoid any hard work, and now he'd have to do the rest himself. I had done more than my share of this heavy workload, and my brother would have to make the house suitable for staging, all on his own, and good luck to him was all I could say. I was seething with an impassioned agitation that my brother had provoked within me, as I marvelled at his blatant audacity. I drove away, holding onto the steering wheel tightly, so that my white knuckles were peering obtrusively through my skin. I navigated my way through this prepossessing Toronto neighbourhood, frothing with inner rage. To match my mood, I could hear the angry drumroll of thunder in the background. Damn, I thought, it's going to rain. Just what I need. I observed grey thunder clouds hovering across the sky like dirty candy floss that is far too unpalatable to eat at a children's fair. It began to bucket down with rain, so that the beaded droplets of rain made my visibility rather poor. Even the windscreen wipers were working hard to fight back the deluge that unapologetically seemed to thunder down. I reduced my speed accordingly. I do not believe I was driving fast, but the glistening road was slippery and wet, so driving conditions became quite treacherous. In the most inopportune, inauspicious moment, a spider, probably from the attic, that had got on my clothes, began to crawl all over my face, and was now burrowing its way into my right eye. So I had to literally push it away. I was momentarily distracted as I tried to do that. My eyes began to weep and to stream, and then everything went badly wrong, like a scene from a horror movie that you never anticipated ever happening, that you cannot unsee, even though you wish you could wipe it off, like an ink spill on a writing desk that you blot away, almost as if it had never happened at all. But happen it did. It was as random and unexpected as the spider crawling up my face. A 5-year-old boy just ran into the road to chase after a large white piece of paper that was blowing away in the wind. The boy appeared from nowhere, like a random bird dropping, magically materializing on a windscreen window, when there seems to be no sign of a bird anywhere, although there was nothing auspicious about this sobering scenario. Moments before, the road was clear of all pedestrians and vehicles, and now a boy came out of nowhere. I couldn't stop in time, so I slammed on the brakes as hard as I possibly could. I tried to maneuver my car out of the way, but my attempts were futile and pathetic. My reaction time was seriously wanting. The boy was thrown from the windscreen onto the tarmac with a mighty walloping crash. I could see a pool of crimson blooming from out of his head on the road, as the poor mother, drenched to the skin from the rain, came running from the pavement. She dropped down on the road on all fours and began desperately cradling the limp body of her boy in her arms, screaming at the top of her lungs, "No! No, please, no! God, no! My baby! My baby!" For a second she looked up at me, and her terrified eyes bored into mine. And then in the gravity of realizing what I'd done, I just knew I needed to get away from this harrowing scene as fast as I could. It was far too overwhelming for me to endure. I couldn't cope with this horrific reality. It was all too much to take on board. I needed to get away from here as fast as I could. Of course I knew what a responsible citizen should do. I knew I should get out of the car to assist the poor mother of the deceased child, offer her support, confess to the police what had happened. But I just couldn't do it. There was no way I could do it. I could feel the bitter taste of nausea rising up in the back of my throat. My whole body felt rigidly stiff and as unmalleable as a waxwork statue in Madame Tussauds, for I seemed incapable of getting out of my car to offer help, even if I'd wanted to. I just could not do it. I didn't have the emotional strength, the courage, or even the willingness to face this horror spread out before me on the road, like a piece of gruesome roadkill. I hurriedly reversed away and speeded like a bat out of hell, while the rain continued to beat down on my windscreen, as if shedding tears for the deceased little boy. I could only imagine what the poor mother was going through. I didn't want to imagine. I refused to allow myself to think about this too much. I knew leaving the mother alone on that road to deal with her grief was the most heartless, cruel thing to do. I'm not proud of what I did, but everything was so surreal. I began to wonder if it had happened at all. And boy, I wanted to believe with all my heart that this had all been a dreadful nightmare that had not really played out in my reality. I hurriedly reversed, speeding away like a bat out of hell, while the rain continued to beat down ominously on my windscreen, almost as if shedding tears for the deceased little boy. I could only imagine what the poor mother was going through right now. I refused to allow myself to even consider this. I knew leaving her alone to deal with her grief was the most heartless, cruel thing for me to do. I am not proud of what I did. Everything was so surreal. I began to wonder if it had happened at all. I wanted to believe with all my heart that this had all been a dreadful nightmare that had not really played out in my reality. What kind of a monster was I, driving away from a scene of an accident like this, with only a slight crack on my brother's windscreen to show for it? It was amazing that there was so little damage done to his car. I deserved to be punished for what I'd done. In that moment, I wished the whole world would fold up like a scroll, and that the memory of this poignant moment would drop off the page like a pressed wild flower, to be remembered no more. No one could hate or despise myself more than I did at this precise moment, but I lacked the courage to face up to the consequences of what I'd done, like a cowering dog hiding under the bed while the storm rages on and the thunder bangs formidably across the sky. The only way I can describe the way I was feeling at this moment was like a hunted animal being pursued by a deadly predator. All I could do was continue to drive on, as if my very life depended on it, until I finally reached the airport. I recall the abundant streams of sweat that were pouring down my back, even though it wasn't a hot day, and my fingers on the steering wheel became slippery. For a long while I sat in my brother's car, staring vacantly into space, not knowing what to do about what had recently transpired. I trembled as I fiddled with my phone, begging myself to summon the courage to call the police, to admit to what I'd done. But I failed to find the strength. I was too much of a coward for that. It was hard to imagine that I was responsible for this little boy's tragic death. I reluctantly leave my brother's second-hand car in the airport, and a message behind on his phone to give him the details of how to collect his car. I also apologized for the unfortunate crack to his windscreen and offered to pay for the damages. I knew my brother would probably leave the windscreen exactly like this for a long time, without bothering to get it fixed. Hell would likely freeze over before my brother fixed the problem, especially on a second-hand car that he barely used. He probably wouldn't even bother to ask me what had happened to the windscreen for it to crack like that. For once in my lifetime, I was grateful for my brother's insouciance. He was like a piece of driftwood, floating on the ocean, going where the current would take him, and being fine where he washed up. But if there was a golfing green somewhere around, even better. That was my brother for you, carefree and untroubled. He was one of those people that never got upset about anything. unless he had to work hard for something. When I boarded the plane to Calgary, which was over 4 hours, it may as well have been 100 lifetimes, for it certainly felt like that. I was tormented by the dramatic, gruesome imagery of the poor child hitting the windscreen window and violently crashing on the tarmac. I kept replaying the incident over and over again in my head, clandestinely wiping away the tears that had gathered in my eyes. The man sitting next to me on the aircraft handed me a tissue and kept asking me if I was all right, and I insisted that I was, but I was far from all right. All I could think about was that poor mother, desperately running into the road to retrieve what was left of her beloved son. What the hell had I done? Why had I not got out of the car to help her? Why had I been such a coward, so desperately afraid? I kept cursing myself for my atrocious behaviour. I had known at once that the little boy was dead, as the blooming blood that pooled from under his head, and the gazed eyes that stared up into space, while it continued to rain, had told me all I needed to know. The mother's distraught expression as she held my gaze was one that unequivocally I knew would haunt me for the rest of my days. I couldn't help but wonder if there would ever be peace in my heart again. I would never forget that agonized face. I could probably pick that woman up in a police lineup without any difficulty at all. The dreadful reality was I was the one that had killed this poor little boy. I could not get my head around this anomaly, and the gruesome, lurid, macabre details that would likely be splashed all over the Toronto Tribune in the morning. I was certain people would be quick to comment on the dreadful monster that had driven off after running over the little boy. The police would be likely looking for me. I was the kind of person that got upset by an animal being killed in a wildlife documentary. I remember I used to think that hit-and-run drivers were the lowest of the low, the cockroaches of society, who failed to take responsibility for what they'd done. But now I was one of them myself, and I barely recognized the person I'd become. When I disembarked from the plane and retrieved my car at the airport in Calgary, where it had been left for the last 3 days, I was so glad to get in something that smelt so familiar and to sink back into the comfortable leather seats I knew so well. I finally drove to my home, not far away from the charming little town of Banff. But I didn't even indulge myself in the radio. I drove back in a stiff, uncongenial silence, entertained only by the horrors of a day I wished that I could unlive. The journey home would likely take over an hour and a half. I was not comfortable driving late at night, but right now I didn't care about those supercilious things. All I wanted to do above anything else in the world was get back to the safe security of my warm, loving and welcoming home that would help me to blot out the rest of the world. I began weaving down the familiar roads that gestured me towards home, but even in the pitch black, I was like a homing pigeon. I knew exactly how to get back to my roosting place, as if my interior navigational radar was as sharp as a hawk, directing me almost supernaturally down sequestered country roads. Everything looked like cardboard cutouts on the horizon, and it was only my headlights that blazed through the darkness, along with the generous, reluctant offerings of a rather reticent moon, that lit up my path ahead. My car soon made the turning down the long curvaceous road through the trees that led directly to the family farmhouse. Never more in my life had I wanted to be home more than I did right now. I dreamed of a long, leisurely sleep that would block out the memories of what had recently transpired. It was as I was driving down our familiar earthen driveway that I immediately braked the car. It shuddered to a violent stop. In the middle of the driveway, at this very inauspicious late hour of the night, that would have intimidated those who are afraid of the dark, as it was velvety. The sky was studded with a few stars that looked far away and distant in the firmament. There was a gargantuan figure standing up on 2 feet in the middle of the driveway, covered with long flowing dark hair. I could see these yellow eyes staring straight at me. What the hell is that? I thought. What the bloody hell is that? There is no way it could possibly be a bear. I inched steadily forward, very gingerly in my car, my eyes scrunching up into narrow slits to get a much better view of this thing that I was scrutinizing. I was expecting the creature would just scoot away as soon as my car crawled cautiously forwards, but it just stood there resolutely in the driveway, staring straight at me, not seeming to feel the need to go away. My heart began to flutter violently in my chest, like a frantic pigeon. Should I be worried? Should I be afraid? Did this thing, whatever it was, impose a threat to me? I was now seriously only 3 feet away from this idiosyncratic creature, whatever on earth it was. My SUV stopped abruptly. My headlights, including the gossamer prisms of light offered by a rather evasive moon, enabled me to see this huge thing in its full glory, so I could take it all in spectacularly and remember every last detail. To my astonishment, I realized I was staring at a Bigfoot, and this powerful, majestic beast was clearly all male, as the energy he exuded was masterfully masculine. We both locked eyes with each other, and in that brief moment my fear was completely expunged, for I had seen warmth, kindness, and genuine concern in those deep, dark, soulful eyes. I heard in my head, "Welcome back home." The creature then promptly marched past me nonchalantly, swinging his arms and legs, and just gliding away into the heart of the woods. It was almost as if meeting me down our driveway at the dead of night was the most natural thing in the world to do. Yet I had never seen this Bigfoot a day in my life, but it was almost as if this creature knew all about me and could see into the very depths of my soul. I was so confounded and bewildered that in one day not only had I killed a little 5-year-old boy, but I'd also stumbled across a Bigfoot on the driveway on my way back to the house. It was an extraordinary set of circumstances to happen within one day. 2 unlikely, very incongruous events, playing out simultaneously into my own reality. Could I be forgiven at this point for believing I had momentarily been flung into a parallel universe? "Oh, thank God you're back," said my mother, who practically pounced on me the moment I opened the front door. I realized she'd been waiting up for me. She was wearing a toweling robe over her nightdress and promptly ferried me into the kitchen, grabbing me by the hand and insisting I left my luggage behind in the car. She studied me curiously, and a frown developed on her weathered face, as if the very sight of me brought her great disquiet. "Look at you, love. You look as if the entire Empire State Building has come crashing down on your very shoulders. Was it really that bad, cleaning up after your father? I might have known." She pulled a face. "I know he's not the tidiest of men. I did warn you that you might have a job on your hands, did I not? Well, I hope that your brother pulled his weight. But if I know Rick, he'd have done anything to avoid lending a helping hand." "It was a big job," I managed to say. "Rick was as useful as an upside-down sloth swinging from the branches. He didn't help me at all." My mother groaned. She rolled her eyes in the back of her head in exasperation. "What do they say? Like father, like son. I might have known that Rick would be completely useless. Honestly, I don't know how Sue puts up with that man. That woman has her work cut out for her, while Rick spends every opportunity playing golf, just like your father would do." "Well," I said rather flatly, "that's pretty much what happened, Mum. Rick pretended to have a dodgy stomach ache while he went off to play golf with a friend. I got most of the stuff done at the house, but there's still quite a lot to do. But I'm leaving Rick to sort that out, and I made that clear to him." "Good on you, love. I'm proud of you. Rick has got to learn that he cannot expect you to do everything for him. Sooner or later, he's going to have to learn to pull his weight. If there was an award in the Guinness Book of Records for the laziest man in the entire world, that man would surely win it. Oh dear, look at me going on and on like this, ranting like a fishwife. It's been such a long trip for you. Even a flight can wear you out. My goodness, I don't remember the last time I saw you looking this pale. Your clothes, well, they do look rather dirty. I'm surprised they let you get on board that flight, looking like that. You look like a feather duster that hasn't been cleaned out after all the dusting's been done in the house." "That's because I was in the attic. There was so much dust up there, it was dreadful. Where is Adam? I asked, referring to my husband. Your husband is up in bed, fast asleep. He did set the alarm to wake up for when you arrived because he was so eager to see you. We've missed you so much. But you know him. He could sleep through a whirlwind. Would you like some hot chocolate, love, before you retire to bed? I'm sure you need some sustenance. You poor thing. You look absolutely shattered. I don't remember ever seeing you look quite so tired. You're completely washed out. I blame Rick for that. Honestly, I could box that man's ears. Are you sure you're all right? You look as if you're trembling, love. Something hasn't happened, has it? She asked, almost as if she'd sensed something about me was really off, even though I did my level best to hide all my distress. You don't know the half of it, I said. But chocolate, well, that will be very nice, Mum. Do you want to talk about it, love? Whatever it is, it's good to get it off your chest, you know. I'd rather not talk about it, Mum, if you don't mind. It'll make things 1,000 times worse for me. Oh dear, that does sound ominous. You can talk to me whenever you like, love, said my mother, looking slightly disquieted. You know I'm here for you whenever you need me. And whatever it is, you know a problem shared is a problem halved. After the delicious hot chocolate that I'd enjoyed with my mother, I trailed up to my bedroom, dragging my tired legs behind me up the stairs, as if I was climbing the last part of the journey in Mount Everest. I tiptoed into my bedroom, relieved to discover my husband was fast asleep. Thankfully, he did not stir when I climbed under the sheets next to him. Before I knew it, I'd fallen into a blissfully deep sleep. At least with my eyes shut, I could get away from the haunting, grotesque imagery that had constantly replayed itself to me during the flight and on my journey back home. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.